Hello, my friends, and I trust that this video finds you well. I just wanted to take a moment and I wanted to add some value today because one of the most common questions that I get are how to handle objections when we're on an appointment, going to set an appointment, whatever it is. And yet, that's what I hear a lot. And one of the things that I've noticed over my time in this business is that when you can handle objections well, you can do whatever you want. You'll get every listing you desire. You'll close every buyer that you desire to work with. Like things get very amazing very quickly when you can handle objections on a high level. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to go over some of the most common objections that I believe that most of us are hearing today, and some of them are kind of timeless. And just share how I handle those things. You might have something great, you might be struggling, and maybe this will help you. And even if you have a great one, it's always really nice to have something else to go to, because maybe your first run at it doesn't work. And if you have something else to say, then you're in a better position to win. And then I want to encourage, and I'll put this in the comments as well, if there's an objection that I missed that you would really like to hear how I would handle it, I will record a quick, now it might not be like pretty, and I can be like in the car, like, and yet I will record a response to yours. If you go ahead and put it in the comments, I'd be happy to do that. Like, stump me, stump the coach. All right. And again, if you're like, who is this guy? Because you haven't gotten the 72,000 emails or seen any other videos. I am the bold coach that is coming your way starting next week. So anyway, so I think one of the most common objections that we are hearing today, or at least that we expect we're hearing, because I feel like sometimes it's not really happening, is where am I going to go? Like, hey, I would love to sell my house. I'd love to capitalize on the equity. And yet, where would I go? And this is how I've been having this conversation and winning listings. This is what my coaching clients and what my team are doing. And that is simply, you know what, Mr. Seller, I totally, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I totally appreciate how you might feel about that. And it's stressful, and it is a little bit difficult to find a house right now. The great news is, with the current state of the market, and let me tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't know how long it'll stay like this. And yet with the current state, you have all of the cards, you have all of the control. So what we'll do is, you want to ask for a longer closing? No problem. You want to ask for a rent back for a couple of months after closing? No problem. You find the right buyer, we might be able to get the rent back for free. And yet either way, we are going to build in a big buffer so that there's no possible way that you are without a home. All right, so that's how I've been saying it, and it's worked really well. I will tell you, you should know your area and have backup plans. So I'm over in Tampa. There are a number of apartment communities that have actually changed or changed over part of their part of the complex into something where they're able to take short-term housing, except it's not Airbnb, so it's not Airbnb expensive. So basically, like, they took this chunk of apartments, especially some of the newer complexes that might have not been completely rented out yet, and they're offering them on a month-to-month basis. So, okay, so you have someone who's really worried and they're really scared that they're not going to find something. Well, there's a good backup plan for them. I think it's also important to ask questions and remind people, like, do you have family in the area? Okay, could you potentially stay with them for a while and put your stuff in storage? Because you have to remember that if the money is big enough for them, like, maybe it's worth getting a little bit uncomfortable in order to get that big fat paycheck, and they can maybe buy a house a few months later if something happens. And yet my team and I sell a lot of homes. Like, we've yet to leave anyone homeless yet. And there are plenty of other options out there, and you're the hero when you can share them with them. Hey, I have and I literally, there's an agent in my office who bought an Airbnb style property just to share with other agents who have clients that are displaced. So are you being a resource for your people if that conversation didn't quite work, or if they have bigger concerns, or maybe something overly specific they're looking for? All right, well, the next thing that's very in line with the current market is, okay, well, so if I'm going to sell high, then I'm going to buy high. Now, those of you that have been doing this long enough, and you were around when prices were not great, it was the opposite. It was, well, I'm excited to buy low, except I don't want to sell my house low. And I think it's important, if that is their objection, and if the objection is that they are going to do both transactions, I think it's important to bring them to reality. And, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I totally understand that you don't necessarily want to buy high, and yet when you're going to move from one home you own into another, you're going to get it on one side. Like if you were to buy low, that means you're going to sell low. If you're going to sell high, yes, you are going to buy high. Now, what's unique about this market, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is that even though they've gone up some, rates are still traditionally super, super low. So we might be able to upgrade you, break, if they're downsizing, this is even better. And yet we might be able to upgrade you and not have you see too much of a rise in interest rate, or in payment, I should say. Plus, the great thing is that we're going to probably get so much for your home. Now, say this when it's appropriate. We're going to probably get so much for your home that you could even put additional money down in order to keep that mortgage payment where you need it. And after all, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, now you wouldn't say this if they're cash, and yet most of our clients are financed. After all, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we don't really live in the price, we live in the payment. Now, shifting from that a little bit, another great conversation around that when someone's concerned about purchase price is to ask them how long they plan to be in the home. Now, this could backfire, because if they tell you only the next year or two, could we go up for another year or two? It's possible. Is it super probable? I don't know. And so maybe it's not a great time for them to buy, and we have to do the right thing. And yet, if they tell you they're going to be there for the next 5 years, 10 years, this is the forever home, sometimes we've got to help our clients, because they look at the short term a lot of the time rather than the big picture. And the price is irrelevant if you're going to live there long term. We can look at 100 years of history and know that they'll still be in a good position when it's time to sell, and they will have spent the time there, and they won't have thrown money away on rent. So remember, sometimes it's just helping them see the forest through the trees, because this is stressful. You know, if you haven't bought or sold a home, you as an agent I'm talking to, if you haven't bought or sold a home in the last few years, you've got to have empathy. We just moved our primary home last year, and we bought 2 investment homes last year. This is not a fun time to do this. So remember to be empathetic and ask questions and help them see the big picture. All right, so this is my favorite, because I'm like a big fan of getting paid. And that's the commission objection. And before any of those little voices in your head, those of you that are watching this, before you think to yourself, well, like, oh, in this market, you just can't get full commission. I am here to tell you that my team, we closed 102 listings last year, just on the listing side. And our average commission on our side of the listing was 3.13. And I'm not sharing that to brag. I'm sharing that because I'm in Florida. I'm not in your exact market, and I'm not that far away. And I promise you that price continues to only be an issue in the absence of value. All right. So I love me a commission objection, because we work very hard. And if I can help other agents get paid properly rather than get paid pennies, then that's something that brings me joy. So, all right. So the seller says, you know, so-and-so said that they would do it for 2.5%. So it's another agent would do it cheaper, or 2% or 1% or whatever crazy thing. Great. Well, you know what, Mr. Seller, I could totally understand why that would be attractive to you. And yet, let me ask you something. You're hiring your real estate agent. One of the biggest reasons you're hiring that agent is to negotiate on your behalf and ensure that you get the most money and the best terms and all of that stuff. Wouldn't you say that that's correct? They'll say yes. Okay, great. Well, this is my concern, is that agent has already shown you their negotiating power. And in fact, if they were willing to give their money away so quickly, how well do you think they're going to protect yours, which doesn't even affect them? And then, of course, you'd follow up with, so let's do the right thing and sign here. Now, that might come up, or they might just straight up say, like, hey, you know what, I'd love to work with you. And I was looking to pay 4%, or insert whatever discounted rate is here. You might not even want to take 6. Maybe some of you out there do 7 and 8%. Good for you. All right. And yet, there you go. Okay, so they'd like to do it for cheaper. Well, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I can totally understand why you'd want to do that. And yet, let me ask you a question. Are you truly concerned with the amount of commission that you're going to pay? Or are you really more concerned with the net, the amount of dollars that are going to end up in your bank account at closing? Now, you, agent, and I know that the concern is the net. And this is where it's very powerful to know your numbers. And if your numbers aren't great, or if you're a newer agent and you don't really have any numbers, using that of the market center. Because when you can say something along the lines of, you know what, The average agent in this market right now is selling at 99.3% of list price, and our average is actually at 101.2%, or whatever the numbers are. When you can find an edge, it's very easy to get the extra money. So those are a couple of ways to deal with commission. The other one that I want to encourage you to use, and now this would not be like our other agent said they do this. This is if they ask you for a discount, not with any context, not because of another agent, they ask you for a discount. I strongly advise you to start with something along the lines of, no, I'm not able to do that, and then continue moving. And you'll know really quickly if it's a big concern. I've done this a long time. I've gone on a lot of listing appointments. Very often when they ask the question and it's kind of, again, with no context, they're just asking because they think that's what they're supposed to do. I mean, if you went to a yard sale and wanted to buy a used end table, you probably wouldn't pay the price on it. You'd probably ask for a discount. And yet, if you really wanted it and that homeowner said no, you'd still pay the price. So it's just like that. So don't be afraid, like don't go too far in. Like you don't want to say too much to them unless they give you a reason to say more. Sometimes simply just saying no, we charge whatever your rate is. Like I'm a 6% person. You know what? I appreciate you asking, and we charge 6%. And then I just keep going, and they'll stop me if that's a big issue. And more times than not, they don't stop me. They asked, I gave them an answer, and they're fine, and they still want to work with me, just like they'll still want to work with you. So that's commission. I'll also, as a side note here, when you're going to set an appointment for a listing appointment, for the love of all things, never tell them your commission on the phone. If they ask you what your commission is, your answer should be something like this. You know what? That is a great question, because you always affirm, even though you don't really like that they're asking, like you always affirm. So you know what? That is a great question. And commission's always negotiable. And it's the first thing that we'll talk about. Can we meet today at 4, tomorrow at 5? Like use it as leverage to close for the appointment. Never say that you just want to discuss it on the appointment, because you'll turn them off. So my thing is always that it's negotiable. And it is. They could pay me 6, they could pay me 7, they could pay me 8. Like I don't really care. And the truth is, in this market, if you had to go to 5% or whatever discounted rate to get the listing, I would still encourage you to do it. I just simply would not discount as a lead in, because most of the time you could get around it and get the money that you earned so hard. All right. Here's another one. You've done your appointment and everything went great. And they say to you that they're going to interview other agents. Well, first of all, if you're pre-qualifying, you would have known that. That's a really important question to ask. And no judgment. If you're there and they say they're going to interview other agents, here's the direction that I always go with that. You know what? Honestly, that's really smart of you smart. Wow. I wouldn't say it that jumbled. That's really smart of you as a consumer, of course, to consider your options. And yet, let me ask you a question, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Do you think that I'm completely capable of selling your home for top dollar? Now, if you did a good job, they're going to actually say yes. So they say yes. Well, you know what? So are you really interviewing other agents because you feel the need to, or do you kind of feel obligated to? And they'll tell you, and look, this won't always work. And yet a lot of times they'll say, well, yeah, I kind of feel obligated. I already said so-and-so that I would meet with them. But you know what? I get that a lot, and I totally understand. This is what I would love to offer you. We can do the right thing and sign the contract today and move forward working together. Since you've already said, you know that I'm the person that can get the job done. And then what I will do is I'll take that weight off for you. I'll call the other agent. I will be completely polite and humble. And I'll tell them that you chose to work with me and they were excited to meet with you, and yet they've chosen to work with me. And, Mr. Agent, what I want to do is I want to allow you the first opportunity to bring any of your buyers into the house, so that hopefully we can work together on the transaction. Maybe we don't even need to put it on the market. When you have a conversation like that, because most of the time, unless you really jacked it up, and all you people are smart, and I know that you practice on a regular basis. So if you've done a good job, they're interviewing out of obligation, or they're interviewing out of even obligation to themselves. Maybe they haven't set other appointments, and yet in their head, they've been trained to believe that they've got to talk to 3 agents. When we can save them a lot of time, and we can just get the listing going from there. For those of you that work with buyers, I think that it's perceived as easier to convert a buyer. And yet I feel in this market, because it's become so crazy, what I'm finding is that a lot of buyers out there are purposely going directly to list agents to work with them. So if you're talking with a potential buyer, you're at open house, you're calling through your sphere or through a database, and they tell you that, this is how I would handle that for those of you that are working with buyers on a regular basis. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I totally can appreciate that. And in this market, it's become such a challenge to get an offer accepted. So I get why you would do that. And yet, how long has that been your strategy? Now, if their answer is 2 days, well, then you kind of dug yourself a hole, and yet this is how we learn. Most of these people, you're not the first agent they've spoken to. Well, I've been doing this for 3 weeks, for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year. I mean, some of these people have been looking forever. And that's where you've got to, this is where you've got to keep things light and say, so you got to like have a smile or have a certain tone to your voice and say, well, I totally get the reasoning, and yet it sounds like maybe it's not working that great for you. What can I ask? Would you be open to a conversation about what it would look like to have a dedicated buyer agent like myself working with you? Now, you've got to be careful how you say it so you don't offend them, and yet you're creating a gap. You're poking holes in their rationale. Now, if they just started, you could still have the conversation and show them the value, because do most people assume that they're going to have to come out of pocket when they buy a house? If they're not experienced, then they might think that. Do they think that some of us only work, like if you're a Keller Williams agent, that you only have access to Keller Williams listings? You have to realize that the average consumer, even if they bought and sold before, don't really know the industry. We do. It's what we do for a living. So a lot of times, if you can just present the value, I'll tell you, I like to put my money where my mouth is. So my team closed 206 sides total last year, and 193 of them were absolutely referral. Like they were from our sphere, they were repeat clients, they were from an agent connection, whatever they were a referral. Well, out of those leftover ones, 9 of them were buyers who were only going to work with the listing agent, who called us on a listing, did not buy our listing, and yet our agent, whoever it was at the time, we have a number of agents, was able to show them the value of having somebody in their corner, of having somebody who was going to rely on more than just the multiple listing service to find them a home. And then they in turn closed on them. So it's a great way to pick up buyers, especially in this market, because the rationale doesn't normally hold. And then one of the last ones that I want to share with you is just the classic, the easy, well, you know what, we've got to think it over. So most of the time, when that's happened, it's that they have a question or a concern or an objection that either we didn't address or they weren't willing to share, which is possible as well. And yet either way, there's something lingering because nobody really needs to think about it. They had you to their house. They want to sell their house. And so when they tell me that they need to think about it, this is normally what I will say. Well, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and I'm happy to give you all the time that you need because I'm not pushy. And I really am not. By the way, those of you that don't know me, you know, I'm really not pushy. And yet, let me ask you something, because most of the time at this point in the conversation with a potential seller, they're ready to either sell with me or they've changed their mind or whatever. And yet there's a decision that has been made. And so I just want to check, are there any questions that I left unanswered for you that we could discuss while I'm still here? I think you just have to stop and let them say something. And 9 times out of 10, there's something that wasn't covered, or maybe you said something that they don't like. And yet when you give them the opportunity to share it and to do so without pressure of like, well, you're going to sign here, press hard to tell me what I have to do. It becomes easy and it becomes comfortable for them to share. And then you simply just go into handling it. The other thing that you can do, and this is goodness, this is up to your discretion. I would tell them like, look, it's kind of the same question when they were going to interview somebody else. Well, let me ask you something. At this point, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do you feel that I'm capable to do a good job, get your house sold, get you top dollar? And again, if you did well, they'll say yes. Okay, great. Well, I totally get that you want to sleep on it or think about it a little bit, talk to your friends, talk to your family, whatever it is they're doing. And yet I'm here today. What I would love to do is go over the contract, get it signed. And then what I will do is I'll leave it here with you. Like I will leave it, I won't take it. And yet when you sleep on it and when you decide that you would like to work with me, you could simply, I could come meet you, grab it. We don't have to take a bunch of time. You could leave it on your doorstep and I can grab it. And then that way we don't waste any time and we can get things moving. And if you decide not to work with me, you can shred it, you can throw it in the trash, you can do whatever you like with it. And then at least you don't have to be pressured and we save time. That's one way to go for it. Now here's what sometimes they'll say. And this is not as often, I notice, and yet I have had people say that they need to pray over it. And I mean, no disrespect and no joking. Like, I have had that happen multiple times. And this is gonna sound silly, and yet I'm gonna tell you right now, I like to get the listing agreement signed. And so I will, well, this is pre-COVID times. So I don't know if I would grab their hands, and yet I would literally say, well, let's pray. Now they might laugh at you, and yet you've lowered a wall. The other thing is about thinking over it or discussing it. You know, another great tactic is to say, you know what, I totally understand that. Why don't we do this? I've got some calls to return. I'm going to step right outside. You guys discuss everything that you need to. And then when you're ready, you let me know. There is something to be said for a little bit of awkward pause and you standing outside and then sitting there like, okay, well, we can't just like leave them out there forever. So that's another direction to go. So I want to share one last thing because I am a bold coach and I get all sorts of objections around that. And I'd love to chat with you about those. You know, you don't have the time, you don't have the money, you've done it before, you don't believe in coaching, like whatever it is. I just want to simply share a statistic with you because to me, numbers always tell a story. So this is from the last round of Bold in October. So this is recent. This is not like a 20-year-old number or anything. Bold agents versus and everyone else within our company, their GCI went up 114%. Now, do you hear that? That's 114%. So that's more than double. So if you have not signed up for Bold, first of all, I applaud you for watching the video this long because I know the average realtor has like squirrel brain like I do as well. I have to finish the video, it's in front of me. My question to you is whatever your reason is for not taking Bold, is it really worth it? Because to me, whether I think back to when I was a new agent or somewhere in the middle, or even now as a millionaire real estate agent team owner, like 114% more always sounds attractive. And I'm not like somebody who hoards money. It's just that I understand the fact that money is good for the good that it can do, both within our own lives and for our family and our friends and our community and for the greater good of the entire universe, to be honest. I mean, some of you have so much greatness in you that you haven't unlocked. You can go change the world. And yet to do that is going to take money because you're always either spending something, it's time or money, and money buys you your time back. So I appreciate that you've watched this far. I want to encourage you, if there is an objection that I did not hit that you would like to hear, please comment. And I promise I might not get back to you in 5 seconds. And yet I'm going to get back to you and I'll do it in video form so you can truly hear like tone and body language and all of that type of stuff. So I will happily get back to you. And if you have any, and I mean any, because you couldn't offend me and I would never air your dirty laundry. So like if it's a financial thing, if you have a particular reason you're not signing up for Bold, I invite you to please reach out to me. I'm happy to chat. You can reach out to me. This is Facebook. You can click my little name and hit me on Messenger. My cell phone is 239-989-1773. Again, 239-989-1773, or you can email me, and it's a long one, and yet it's easy. It's hudson@warrencoachinggroup.com. Hudson, Hudson, at Warren Coaching Group, WARREN coachinggroup.com. I think you're fabulous. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon.